Welcome to the TOEIC TOEFL IBT Independent Writing Tasks, Day 5, Part 2. Our objectives for this final video in our series are to wrap up all of the information we have covered in this video, and then to talk about how to manage your time on the tests, and conclude with Part 6, improving your writing. Then you will have to do one final homework assignment of putting everything we've learned all together. So, if you recall that the independent writing task on both the TOEIC and TOEFL involve 30 minutes to plan, write, and revise a personal essay of about 300 words. It must be typed, and that the word processing program that you'll be using is essentially similar to the Notepad feature in Microsoft Windows. Much like the speaking section on both tests, the writing section is evaluated holistically. So remember that the idea is when your essay is evaluated by an ETS rater, basically they're looking at the essay as a whole. And in general, it's the ability to organize your thoughts, express your ideas clearly and logically, and use vocabulary appropriately that's generally more important than demonstrating, say, grammatical accuracy. Finally, if you'll recall, the content is evaluated on a scale from 0 to 5, with 5 being the highest. And based on my observations, generally content and vocabulary are more important, and organization is generally more important than style. So, an important thing to recognize is that the structure of a standard college essay is full of parallel, or as we'll call them, repeated or reflected ideas to help promote an overall unified approach. So, if you've noticed throughout this video series, we've presented several ideas that kind of reflect each other in many ways. For example, in the structure of the TOEIC and TOEFL essay, in the introduction, body, and conclusion format, you probably also notice that the body paragraph organization follows a generally similar type of organization. For example, you'll notice that the thesis, which controls basically the ideas that drive the rest of the essay in the body, pretty much is found also in the topic sentences of each paragraph in the body. And that the topic sentence itself also controls the ideas that you're trying to make in the essay. Of course, in the essay, the idea is the conclusion also revisits the thesis, but then provides a sort of wrap-up of the entire essay. And again, this idea is repeated or reflected in the concluding sentence or concluding sentences of the body paragraph as well. So in other words, think of the body paragraph to be sort of a mini essay by itself, which reflects or parallels the whole essay. So again, the thesis, as we mentioned, is the main controlling idea for the essay. But the topic sentence basically accomplishes two things. It connects to the thesis while also controlling its own paragraph. And by following these recommendations, you'll see how your essay will be much more unified and cohesive, which are two ideas that the test evaluators, they really do value. So now that we've discussed the writing of the essay, now it's time to think about how to manage our time in actually doing it on the test. Again, it's important to think about that when you sit down to write, you need to have some kind of strategy while taking this part of the test. Because again, time is very important. Obviously, it would be easier to write these essays without all the pressure. But according to the tests, it is important to be able to demonstrate these ideas under a time constraint. And again, this is basically to reflect what you'll see at the university experience as well. Because you have to write it under a deadline. And that is part of going to college here in the United States. So, we're going to unveil what I like to call the 5, 20, and 5 plan. And basically this is a way to divide up the 30 minutes that you have to write in a way that will allow for you to do all of the things we've discussed in this video series. So in the 5, 20, and 5 plan, the first 5 minutes are spent planning your response. The second part, the 20 minutes, is referring to how long you have to write the essay itself. And the final 5 minutes are devoted to reading and revising as much of the essay as you can, obviously keeping in mind that 5 minutes is not a lot of time. So first, let's start with the planning stage. As we've mentioned throughout this video series, you have to be able to identify the essay type fairly quickly. And then during this time, you have to be able to write down some ideas. So we've talked a lot about concept mapping. Obviously, there's not enough time to do that during the test. So one thing I might suggest is just write down some phrases and ideas that come to mind, and try to think of some examples and reasons as quickly as possible. Also during this time, you might want to think about choosing the two that you feel are the best to include in your writing. During the writing stage, of course, it's always appropriate to remember the 3 parts we've been focusing on: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Of course, sometimes writers get into trouble because they don't have an appropriate balance. In other words, they spend too much time writing the introduction or even the first reason for the paragraph, for the essay. So again, try to get an appropriate balance throughout. And as we've stressed many times before, content and organization are the most important things they look for on the test. During the final 5 minutes, whatever time you have to devote to this, you need to read over the essay again as quickly as you can. If you notice any mistakes, try to correct them. But of course, it's not going to be easy to try to fix everything. So you might just want to focus on one particular thing. For example, if you're writing a lot in the past tense, you might want to make sure that all of your verbs are in the past tense. Generally, during these final 5 minutes, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to make a lot of corrections. So there you have it, our 5, 20, and 5 plan. Now, of course, this plan is not going to be easy to do at first. It's something that you have to train yourself to do. So keep in mind, some things that you might want to think about is revise as you go along. And the more you practice and write, the better you'll be able to spot any mistakes that you make along the way. Another recommendation that I've heard from other instructors is that probably 300 words is not enough. So try to write more than 300 words. Now, you may not be ready to do that now, but I have noticed that the better essays receive higher scores that generally are longer. Now, of course, a couple of things to keep in mind. Don't experiment with new vocabulary if you're not sure about the meaning. Using a word incorrectly, or even using the wrong word entirely, could possibly result in a lower score if it prevents someone from understanding what you're trying to say. And please, don't repeat yourself or any other part of the essay prompt in your response. So in other words, don't just keep copying phrases or words, and it's especially a big no-no to repeat any part of the essay in the introduction of your essay. Now again, the key here is when you practice for the test, make sure you practice in similar conditions. So again, for example, make sure you practice the same time of day every day, and also the same time of day as to when the test is going to be given. Most students take the TOEFL or TOEIC in the morning, so in this case you might want to make sure that you're practicing in the morning for the tests. Again, make sure you use Notepad, not Microsoft Word. And of course, no internet access or dictionaries are allowed on the test, so in case you wanted to use a word, don't go to the internet just to look up the meaning. Of course, a final word is important to share here. Keep in mind that this is a test. And the key that many students need to keep in mind is that a test will only test what's on the test. This is not a complete picture of you or your abilities. So keep in mind that your self-worth is not determined by a test. I mean, your life is not going to depend on whether you pass this test or not. And just keep in mind, if you're not successful the first time, well, guess what? The sun will still rise. Your friends and family, well, they'll still like you. And life will continue. I think these are important lessons for students to keep in mind. So are you ready for these tests after this video series? Well, sorry, but probably not yet. So the key is to think about, from now, what can I do to improve my writing? Well, here are some suggestions. Obviously, you need to practice a lot. Writing especially. I find that writing is probably one of the most difficult things English as a second language students have to do. But I do believe that the more you write, the more comfortable you will be. And most students don't spend a lot of time writing. And keep in mind that emails, tweets, or text messages, those really don't count as writing. You need to practice as much as you can using the similar test format. Now, of course, another problem is many students want to take the test as soon as possible, but they clearly still need more English. So again, recommendations seem to be fairly obvious here about taking more English courses. Trying to do things using more English in your everyday life. So, for example, try to read more. And not just, websites, but also think about printed material like newspapers or science magazines. Try to pay attention to the news, especially on the radio. Again, this helps build your listening ability, which, again, is an important part of the test itself. And try to speak more at work and home and neighborhood, especially about things that are a little more academic, not just everyday topics. And, of course, be patient. It's very difficult, especially if you're at a fairly high level, if you feel like you're not making a lot of progress, well, that's because oftentimes high-level students often have difficulty making dramatic improvements. You know, when you were a beginning English student, you had a lot of possibilities and a lot of direction, but a lot of potential as well. But the more that you learn, the more difficult it is to make the same kinds of increased improvements overnight or, over a few weeks. So now the question becomes, well, when will we be ready for the tests? Well, again, for most dedicated students, I find it might take them anywhere from 6 to 8 months to prepare. And of course, this does depend on your English level. I think you'll be ready when you're able to take the test in the time limits given without necessarily worrying about the time. So generally what I like to stress to students is that taking a test should be a natural part of your life. As you're practicing every day, it should be something as natural as, say, brushing your teeth. Something that you incorporate every day and you don't really think about. Of course, it's also somewhat like preparing for a marathon. Obviously, a marathon takes a lot of time and preparation, but you don't just start by running as fast as you can, as far as you can on the first day. So, what do you do when you are ready? Well, again, if you have opportunities, take practice tests when they're available. And there are several options here depending on which test you're looking at. The ETS official TOEFL IBT guide is a good source. Oxford University Press has several good TOEIC test preparation series. The TOEFL does have a program called Practice Online after you register for the test. And then, of course, there are numerous publishers who publish preparation books for the TOEFL or TOEIC, such as Longman, Pearson, Delta, Barron's, and so on. But I would not recommend just sitting down and trying to take a practice test every week. You have to note your weaknesses and strengths, and then space out your practice tests. Many students just want to sit down and take as many tests as possible, thinking that's all they need to do. Now, if you're interested in registering for either test, don't call the university or test center. You need to go to this website, www.ets.org, and of course choose either the TOEFL or TOEIC test. And then under learners and test takers, on either test, you need to choose register for the test in order to do so. Now, speaking of preparation, what's a good preparation schedule? Well, again, if you're thinking about 6 to 12 months out, you have to make sure, first off, you know that the test is available. And be aware of any requirements that the particular university or workplace that you're looking for. So, for example, if you need a 60 or 66 on the TOEFL from the university, make sure you're aware of what those minimum requirements are. Obviously, taking a prep course would be helpful during this time. Taking English classes. Engaging in more academic topics, especially the topics that you don't do necessarily every day. So reading, for example, would be a good start, and of course writing. And if you're serious about taking these tests, you need to practice for these tests pretty much every day. They need to be part of your routine. And I would also recommend that at first, don't make them more than 2 hours at a time. I generally find that after a couple of hours, it's pretty hard to concentrate. And at the beginning, don't take any practice tests yet. It's more important to focus on the skills you need, not just the time. Now, as you get closer, within 3 to 6 months, again, taking English courses is a good idea, but you might want to consider incorporating some time tests. And especially if you're using textbooks such as Longman Pearson, they incorporate a lot of mini tests, which kind of help begin to introduce to you in a fairly small way on how to focus on the skills under a time limit. At this point, you may want to think about taking maybe one complete practice test and give yourself about a month or two apart. If you have any official practice tests, in other words, tests that have been published by ETS, you probably want to save those to about 1 or 2 months before you take the actual test. Again, as you get closer, time is becoming more important, but it should be something that occurs naturally. Again, you may want to start considering using a watch or some sort of time device to make sure that you are paying attention to how long it takes you to do these things on the test. If you have any problem areas, now's the perfect time to really start focusing on them. And I often tell students that generally within a couple of months to a month before the test, if you're taking any practice tests, you're probably trying to determine what your score is going to be. It's pretty difficult to continue to improve dramatically within the last month or so of a test before you take a test. Again, maybe a couple of weeks before, you might want to take one more practice test just to see what you might get on the real test, and hopefully you'll be able to secure that score. Because again, it's probably highly unlikely you're going to improve a lot. Again, keep up that practice routine. Just because you're getting closer to your goal, don't necessarily stop. But at this point, if you're a few weeks before, I wouldn't worry over any individual skill if you're having difficulty still. So again, if you're having some particular issue with, say, writing a hook for your essay, it's probably not the most important thing to worry about just a couple of weeks before you take the test. And of course, I always like to stress to students, make sure you know where the test center is before you take it. The night before, try to relax, but not too much. This is probably not the perfect time to go to a party all night or to do anything stressful or strenuous, so don't try any new exercise routines. Go ahead and have your clothes ready. Go to bed at a normal time. Don't try to stay up late, and especially don't try to study anymore in terms of the kind of same intensity. We call that cramming. Don't cram. No practice test at this point. If you have any notes, you might want to review them. And of course, the day of the test, do the things you normally do, but remember, that's it. No more studying at this point. Make sure you get to the test center with plenty of time before the test, and I do believe the TOEFL and the TOEIC usually recommend an hour before the test even begins. And my advice is don't plan on doing anything else for the rest of the day, especially for the TOEFL, because it's an extremely long assessment. And then after the test is over, treat yourself to ice cream, because you did it. Even if you didn't get the score you wanted, you at least accomplished this particular goal. So congratulations. And then I tell students, if you didn't get the score you wanted, well, again, most likely part of the problem is involving vocabulary. So you probably want to study more academic vocabulary. For example, if you're not familiar with the academic word list, you probably do need to make sure you're familiar with that. Take more English classes, especially in the areas you need help. Keep practicing for the test, especially focusing on your weaker areas. And again, continue to make efforts to increase your English exposure outside of class. Thanks for watching this video series. Good luck.